So, good morning, everyone. How many of you would consider yourself coffee drinkers? Okay, so I'm sure that means you make regular stops to coffee shops, and you've probably noticed that the coffee culture of the United States is very fast-paced. And this is the exact opposite of coffee culture in Austria, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. And while coffee itself is deeply rooted in Austrian culture, it's the history and the traditions and the modern day coffee houses that really makes up the bulk of coffee culture in the country. And so I'm going to start off by giving you a little background information on the history of coffee in Austria and how it was introduced there and the impact it's had. So coffee was introduced in 1683 during the Turkish invasion, and when the Turks left that fall, they left behind sacks and sacks of coffee beans. And so small coffee houses started to pop up in the capital, Vienna. And after that, coffee just kind of started to grow in popularity. And you get to the kind of like mid to late 1800s, where according to this book called The Coffee House Wits, you have kind of like the golden age of the coffee house in Austria, which was from the late 1800s to about 1938. And so in the beginning of that period, you have what is called the coffee house literature. So some of Austria's most famous pieces of literature came out of this time period, and they were written by authors who would go to the coffee house and sit there for hours and just collaborate with other writers or try to gain inspiration from the atmosphere, and sometimes they would have books and newspapers there, so it was a good place to get your work done. And then around 1900, according to Travel Leisure, there were about 600 coffee houses in Vienna alone, which, when you think about it, for 1900, 600 coffee houses is a lot. And so they were very popular. And then towards the end of kind of like this golden period, the coffee houses started to downfall because towards about 1938, the Jews started fleeing Austria, and a large portion of the population was made up of Jewish people. And in 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, and it was under his control. And so after that, you had a lot of the population was fleeing or being killed off. So it really hurt business, and that was kind of the end of this golden period. And it wasn't until the 1980s that there was a revival in the coffee house, when people kind of realized that this was a significant part of their culture and that they wanted to preserve it. And part of what makes the coffee house so significant is the fact that there are so many traditions that go along with it. And they were nicknamed public living rooms because people would stay there for hours. And it was just a place to kind of meet and get together with friends, and all it took was you just had to buy like 1 cup of coffee and maybe a pastry, and that was it. So that's kind of hard for us to imagine, because you go to a Starbucks today and you stay there for hours the whole day, you're kind of expected to buy more than one thing. But here people go all the time and they only buy one item. And also the way that the coffee is presented is pretty traditional. It's usually put in a large cup on a saucer, and then it's served with a glass of water, and then you have like your pastry on the side. And the atmosphere itself is also very traditional. You have traditional coffee houses in Austria today that still have the wait staff and the marble tables and the big chandeliers. And another pretty cool part of it is that back in like this golden period before radio and TV, people got their news from newspapers. And so traditional coffee houses would have these large stacks of newspapers from all over Europe in lots of different languages. And so that was just a way for people to get their news. And even modern coffee houses today in Austria, they still have traditional elements, but they're just trying to differentiate themselves. So now you have places that have Wi-Fi or serve food or have like a more modern design. But I think that it's the tradition of going to a coffee house that, it lives on today in Austria, and it's still a significant part of their history, and it gives you a glimpse back into the past. And so in order to appreciate the extent to which coffee's had an impact on Austrian culture, I think it's important to understand the history and the traditions and the modern day applications of coffee in Austria. And I can't see Americans slowing down our lives anytime soon, but I think that all of us coffee and non-coffee drinkers could learn something from the Austrians. And so next time you find yourself with a little extra time on your hands, decide to just sit back and sip your cup of coffee or your tea or even your beer, and just make sure you're doing it for pure pleasure.